Is now officially open. We have a very short agenda. We're essentially going to have a discussion around alternative septic systems. But just to open it, is there anybody that wishes to make a comment? Not on the agenda. Anything else other than septics? Okay, so just as an introduction, and I'll let Art maybe finish it up. As you know, we've had there are proposed regulations that have been presented to the board to deal with septic system in the Harbor District, primarily generally dealing with alternate design systems in case a system would fail or a new system had to be introduced. We need to stop for a minute and think about that because some issues have been raised that would make that probably a bit complicated. So, Art, if you want to say anything else, and then introduce our guest.
Yeah, we have George Hoyfelder here, the director of Barnstable County Health Department. He's here to talk about innovative alternative septic systems and, focusing on the seasonal use and some of the other things we may be able to do to successfully implement a plan in the needs area. So, without further ado, George.
George. And welcome, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you. I'm told I need to speak into a mic because this might be recorded. And I guess there was some misunderstanding. I thought, Art, you wanted me to talk about animal regulation? Anyhow, yes, I heard the roar even on the other side of the pond.
Well, we're going to deal with that in the fall.
So I'd like to do two things tonight. Give a very brief overview of innovative alternative septic systems, but leave the majority of the time open for all the questions you might have regarding them. So I have some help here, going to sort of advance the slides. By way of introduction, I am the county health officer over in Barnstable. We have been dealing with the issue of innovative alternative septic systems for about 15 years now, at least. In 1999, because there was such sort of a push for having alternative septic systems introduced to our area, my background had me ask the very simple question of, do they work? So our department has sort of a three-pronged approach. The first one was to become the experts in the area on it, so we established a testing center over on the mainland right outside the Mass Military Reservation, where we've tested over 30 to 40 alternative technologies in a test center setting where they're really pushed through their paces. The other is that we are actively involved in other parts of the country in monitoring the system performance of these various technologies in those parts of the country and determining how applicable those data are to our area. And the third prong is that we monitor over 1,800 systems in Barnstable County and allow that data to be sort of its open access. You can see it. In fact, it's a very user-friendly site in which you can determine which technologies are working and what they promise they do versus what they really do too. So next. Okay, so what are innovative alternative septic systems? Basically, they're units that manipulate the natural cycles of nature inside a black box to achieve a certain return. In our area, it might be to reduce nitrogen, but by far across the Commonwealth, these systems are used to apply to get sort of a reduction in leach field sizes because they treat the wastewater before they go to the leach field. So on Cape Cod and in your area, the focus is nitrogen or in some instances phosphorus. But it really is manipulating natural cycles that occur in the soil, that could occur in the soil with certain enhancements just to achieve a reduction in a contaminant. Next. Okay, in the case of nitrogen, it really is pretty easy, folks. I mean, we take in food. We poop and pee out that food parts that we don't use. That nitrogen gets into the ground. It travels to a receptor site, which the ones that we're mostly concerned with, drinking water, and marine environments. In marine environments, nature has no problem taking all the nitrogen we give it. The problem is it usually expresses that nitrogen in a way we don't like. If it's a lot of algae, which create all the oxygen you're breathing right now, about 90% of what you're breathing was created by algae in the ocean, that's fine. But at night, when they respire, it sucks that oxygen out of the water, and if there are fish in the area, they're needing the oxygen. It isn't there. You get fish kills. You get lack of diversity. You get a lot of black muck forming because the bacteria go anaerobic. And that's what we're really trying to prevent in our area. There's a big thrust on reducing nitrogen so that we don't get that feeding an environment, which then gives us an undesired return, algae mats, blooms, dead fish, dead shellfish. But in context of a septic system, really that septic tank ammonium goes into the leach field, converts to nitrate, and the nitrate is very mobile. What we try to do in alternative septic systems is intercept the nitrate and get the nitrogen back up to nitrogen gas, let God do the shipping where it came from, which is the Midwest, because that's what we do. That's the Zen of Ben. We eat food, we poop it out here close to the marine environment, gets in the groundwater, feeds the algae. The algae eventually will convert it back up to nitrogen gas. At some point, that environment will convert it back up to nitrogen gas. It's the cycle of life, folks, and everything has it. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. Next. So, IE systems are typically more complex. In a standard system, you have incoming wastewater, goes to a septic tank, goes to a leach field. Pretty simple there. And the primary reason those were really invented was to keep the sanitary waste away from us so that we don't get infected by it. And the leach field basically was originally designed just to make that wastewater go away. In an alternative septic system, we're intercepting that before it gets to the groundwater, the leachate, and we're actually sort of remanipulating the nitrogen cycle to get it up into nitrogen gas. Or if we're trying to get rid of just the strength of the wastewater, all we're doing is pumping air into it. But the first thing you ought to know is IE systems are more complex, like you really had to be told that, right? Next. Okay, this is what we ought to remember. Where there's an alternative septic system, where there's any mechanical or air intervention, failure is always an option. It always happens that if you aren't watching these things as you let them proliferate in your community, they will not work. It's a pretty simple principle. If you're not watching them, they're not working. Next. And a comprehensive plan to maintain and monitor IE systems, should you choose that, in your community to address your nitrogen issues, have a management system or a monitoring system in place. Why? Because you as a Board of Health, I'm on a Board of Health, I sit on that board and a vendor comes in and says, gee, we'd like to apply this technology in our area. If I have no information on that technology, who are we listening to? The salesman? I don't think so. I think you ought to be listening to the data. And the data are available, and you should be, if you put these in your community, generating and tracking those data yourselves, because they are the iterative process by which you can say, oh, these are working in our community, or these aren't, and we're not going to allow any more, or these are working super, so we're going to allow more of those. Next. So, the requirements in Massachusetts are that all IE systems have to have operation and maintenance contracts. They usually have routine inspections that can be 1 to 4 times a year. And the frequency of monitoring can be set by either a Board of Health or the state has certain things that they require being monitored. You should know as a Board of Health that anybody comes to you to use one of these in a variant situation, you can require whatever monitoring you want. And you might ask, what is reasonable monitoring? And we have guidelines for that. Next. So, monitoring IE performance. Next. Now, here on Cape Cod, we have 1,800 systems. That generates, think about this for your Board of Health, and I've been over to your Board of Health office, and it is so spacious you can handle this. You really can. I know it. That generates 15,600 reports and 111,700 data points. These are information by which you as a board you have access to them now. I mean, we keep everything open access. But again, you should be, as you implement these in your community, you should have a system that tracks these for your own edification so that you can see how they're working. So every Monday night or whenever you do meet, you're not approving technologies where you say, gee, we hope they work. No, you should know they work. Next. Okay, in our system, it's particular nitrogen is what we're concerned about. Next. And the magic number is 19 milligrams per liter. According to the Commonwealth, 19 milligrams per liter at the discharge of an innovative alternative septic system represents a 50% removal of nitrogen load. So now it came to, as I was looking at your maps, and you're familiar with what load requirement reductions are required to achieve your goals. If it's 50% reduction, then all of your systems should be at least meeting 19 milligrams per liter. But somebody's asked, well, should we just apply alternative septic systems everywhere? And I always use the example. You know, if you have to go to 0 to 60 in 9 seconds, you don't want to buy a Volkswagen Bug. You buy a Porsche. But if you don't have to do it in 19 seconds or 9 seconds, excuse me, you might say, okay, I can take it slow. So the message there is it depends on what your goal is of what technology you apply to it. If you need 80% removal, these systems, I will tell you right now, most alternative septic systems, with few exceptions, will not remove 80% of your nitrogen. So if that's the goal, don't start down the road buying Volkswagens. You're going to have to go to the Porsche. And if 50% is your goal, I can reliably tell you that most of the units will make 50% removal 80% of the time. Next. So where did that 19 come from? The 19 came from an assumption that we use 55 gallons a day. There's 2.9 kilograms per person per year. That equals 38 milligrams per liter. So 50% of that would be half of 38, 19. Now, I will tell you that there are other parts of the country don't believe these numbers. Most of them think that really what you start off with is somewhere around 60. So 50% removal of 60 would be 30. But this is the way the Commonwealth does it, and this is a very conservative estimate. If you get down to 19 milligrams per liter, the Commonwealth believes in a very conservative way you're getting at least 50% removal. Next. Okay, so here's what the data look like, and here's what you could access on the internet, although you could do it by technology. These are all of our systems and our cumulative frequency, a frequency of how many times they reach a certain, down the bottom, 19 milligrams per liter. You see the nice color there? And of all the systems on Cape Cod, all 1,800 systems, they reach 19 milligrams per liter about 76% of the time. Not 100% of the time. But you can also see that some are reaching much better performance, and some are reaching a lot poorer performance. So again, what we believe is if your systems are meeting this kind of curve in their performance, you're probably getting a good 50% removal on average of all of your systems out there. Next. Here's how the data will present themselves if you look up, for instance, if you want to know how every FAST unit on Cape Cod works, you type in the FAST. It starts showing you what's called a box whisker diagram. The box whisker diagram, next, is really a representation of the data. Inside the box, next, inside the box, one more time, is about 50%, next, is about 50% of all the data points fit in a nice bell curve. 50% of the observations will be within that box. And, of course, 50% will be higher or lower. Next. So the median value is smack in the middle. Next. I'm flying through this, so if you can ask all the questions you want afterwards. Next. So the way you would see the data on the internet, if you checked our website, there would be minimum value, maximum value, a meaty portion of the curve, 50% in the box whisker, and then outside the 25% would be where you would see, the whole 100% of your observations. Next. So this is what they look like. These are all the single-family systems on Cape Cod with 12 or more present samples. And if you look at this graph, what you would see, the little sort of purple line across is 19 milligrams per liter, is every system to the left of that is doing better than 19, and every system to the right of that is doing poorer than 19. Now, again, 19 milligrams per liter had with it certain assumptions for 50% removal. We believe that even those to the right of the 19 are probably still removing 50%, some of them. And actually, some that look like they're doing real well, you know how you could get a system to do real well? Just run more water into it because it's based on concentration. So we've found about 30% of those that look like they're doing worse are really doing better. And about 20% of those that are really doing better, look like they're doing better than 19, are really just diluting their wastewater because they have, 5 teenage kids in the house and they're taking 2-hour showers. Next. This is what the data looks like from all of the systems. And again, these box whisker diagrams just give you a basic idea of the median value, which is the little Dow Jones line going up, up and up. They tell you that about 76% of these systems are performing at 19 milligrams per liter. Next. And what we have found is the poorer a system performs, like out in the B and C area, the poorer a system performs, the wider the variation in numbers. Now, a lot of those out there, and even some in the A area, are seasonal systems that the first sample was taken in June when they first got here, and the August sample didn't quite balance it off. So we do see higher variability in seasonal systems simply because they don't start up right away. They'll be starting up about 2 to 3 weeks into their operation, but we'll address the issue of seasonality in a bit. Next. Okay, so for single-family homes, we've figured out that about 76% of them perform 50% removal, and about 71% of the multifamily systems remove 50%. They remove 50% 71% of the times. Next. Okay, so IA technologies remove 50% of the influent nitrogen about 75% of the time, roughly speaking. Next. And if you really want to see the data online, that's the site to go to. This will tell you how many are on Cape Cod. Will tell you the performance by technology. It will tell you by town. And you can really filter through the data to see which systems perform the best. So that was a very brief tour through the data. I know you have a number of questions relating to seasonality or seasonal use, so I'm just going to open it right up to questions.
Okay, thank you. Just how many systems do we have on this island?
Last count was 214 varying models.
Right, and we follow the data through this system.
We do not. We are gathering it all up as fast.
I thought we were going to join that system.
We are, as soon as we get it all gathered up and get it to them.
So how are we monitoring those systems?
We are not.
We're not.
This system in particular monitors not only your maintenance contracts, which are key. They remind owners, they remind maintenance people that they have to go and inspect the system. They monitor the actual analysis itself, and they keep track of any complaints on the systems themselves. So once all the data are in from the town and island and county of Nantucket, then you will be able to check on and see exactly how all your systems are performing.
See, I'm a little concerned because I knew we were going to enter the system, but I thought we had entered the system. So we have entered the system, but we haven't entered any data.
Right. Everything has been put into place so that we can join, and we are actively gathering that information.
And what's the timeline?
The timeline is I'm going to say completely, 6 months to maybe
Why
a
is
little
it so
more.
long?
Because these people have to provide us, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, we cannot enter into your program without an active operating and maintenance agreement?
Right, well, we require, because you should require as a board, an operation and maintenance requirement, operation and maintenance contract. As soon as we get that, then we know from your wishes expressed at a Board of Health meeting how many times they need to monitor each year. I don't know whether you've set that, but there are some reasonable things that I would suggest you start doing if you haven't been doing. And then once that's in there, we contact the operator, let them know how to get onto the system and how to report their findings. Because that's really what was needed, and I don't know whether your board ever passed it. But it was a simple regulation that said, if you own, operate, and maintain a system in the town of Nantucket, you shall report those findings in a format designated by the board.
We did approve
Okay.
such a regulation. I guess, again, my concern is that that was a while ago, yes?
It was, and we are actively trying to see, for example, now we have to send letters out to, first of all, we have to identify of the 214 who have operating and maintenance agreements. That's first. Then we have to send out letters to those who don't. We have to get them in compliance, and then we can join, as we get those operating and maintenance agreements, their program. So it's going to take a little time. It's dependent upon possibly citing people to get them in compliance if they ignore us. So that's why I'm saying at least 6 months.
Any comments on that from the board? That just, again, I remember this was a long time ago. Not a long time ago, but it was
At least a year
at
and a
least
half.
a year ago, and
How do we speed up the process?
we still haven't done anything.
We're doing an awful lot right now to try to bring it into compliance. Daily, we've been working on this since January, trying to track them down, go through the files, identify them. This is not something, as of right now, that we're not attempting to complete.
Well, maybe later we can discuss this or get a sense of what kind of extra resources you would need or how it fits in the priority of all your other tasks.
Well, we have the intern working on
Yes.
it every single day.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay,
Good.
we've already got a database set up. She's got to rifle through files to identify what type of system it is and track down the owner's address so that we can send them a letter. This is all we're working on this actively.
Well, let's get on to our questions about, as you know, we have these proposed, I think there's a copy here somewhere, these proposed regulations that talked about alternative systems in this particular, we have a map, well, in the harbor area.
Yes,
in
I've
general.
seen the map.
And I guess the question that came up to me when we were kind of rolling along with this, someone raised their hand and said, yes, but, well, first there's an expense, and then we'd always have to judge, the expense versus the benefit. But then if it's a seasonal system, there are problems with it. Like, for instance, the pumps roster, they don't work right, and we have a lot of our residents are not full-time residents.
Right.
So how do we deal with that? Or, my other question is there alternatives to alternatives?
Well, regarding seasonal, I always say that by virtue of them not being there 75% of the time, you have a 75% removal right away. So the question always comes up to say, okay, of the other time they're here, 25% of the time, is it worth it to have an alternative septic system? Will they work? And I will tell you that functionally, that if a system has been used for one season, the startup on the following season is usually 2 to 3 weeks. Particularly for trickling filters, you have a lot of septic tech out here. Those are trickling filter. And those will come up to speed within that time. So for 3/4 of the time, you have no nitrogen. And now the other quarter of the time, you can achieve up to 50% 1 month in. So you have to decide as a board whether that's what you want to do. I will tell you that from our point of view at the Falmouth Board of Health and many boards on the Cape, they've said, well, how do we know they're just operated during that period? I mean, people do come down for the weekends, and the shoulder season gets broader every year. So is it really only 3 months or not? So what many boards have decided is, well, since we can't track that aspect of when that change happens or what the real use of the property is, there is a benefit in requiring the IA technology because, 1, 75% removal right away, and 2, for those 3 months they are here, after the first month they're achieving 50% removal at least. So it is a decision a board has to make, and I understand it's not an easy decision. But as far as what the science says these systems after the first season startup will resume operation within 2 to 3 weeks to get up to their full run. And they can never do more harm than a standard system, particularly if you have allowed these systems to go in with any reductions, for instance, groundwater or size of soil absorption system or anything like that.
Let me just follow up, and then let the rest of the board have questions. You know, someone told me that one of the problems, I mentioned that before, was if the pumps are turned off or they're not being used, they rust and they break down once they're started up if it's a seasonal situation.
Well,
do I understand what I'm at? First of all, I don't even think I understand what I'm asking. But
well, you're asking a pretty logical question. If I have a pump and it's sitting in wastewater all year and it isn't running,
right,
what's my probability when I turn it on it runs? That's a pretty good question. So the answer would be it's supposed to run. It's a pump that's warranted to run.
Okay.
Many of these, particularly in the septic tank systems, if they're stainless pumps, they better run. That's what they're supposed to do. So will 1 or 2 freeze up? Freeze up meaning that they don't function, not physically freeze, but will they freeze up? Well, there are things you can do to prevent that from happening if you think that's going to be a problem. But we have never seen, for instance, Microfast is one of the most popular systems in our area. We've never seen it so that that pump has not operated when it first turns on in the beginning of the season, unless a mouse is nested in some of the electronics. But that's not a submersed pump. But pumps that are submersed, perhaps the operator at that point would say, fine, we'll shut the system down in August and we'll pull those pumps up, we'll rinse them off, we'll keep them off to the side. They could do that.
okay.
Two questions. The lifespan of one of these systems and the most optimum inspection time? Period between inspections.
Okay, that would depend on the complexity of the system. Generally, you do not want to have a maintenance frequency of less than a year. It should be annually. Twice a year is good, and if the system is very complex, like if you have something like a sequencing batch reactor, something like a FR Mahoney, the Amphidrome, or maybe some of your trickling filters that have a little bit more moving parts, something like the Orenco trickling filter, which is popular in our area, you might say, okay, we're going to have that 3 times a year. But really, it's sort of like your furnace or like your pool. How many times do you have your pool serviced each year if you have a swimming pool and you don't service it yourself? You know, you want to keep it functioning. And I would say never go below once a year. Besides, you can't because that's a state regulation. But the board should set, we always set at least twice a year when we have reduced sampling at a place, because our requirement is that they test 8 consecutive times. They must show us that they reach 50% removal, and then they can apply to our board for reduction. We allow that reduction, but never reduce the inspection frequency to less than twice a year. I mean, these are working biological units that somebody can actually break or shut off or not operate. There are things that tell an operator whether that's been done or not. And twice a year is, in my personal opinion, not outrageous to have twice-a-year maintenance contract. Yes?
Is seasonal system getting up to run, like you said, normally takes 2 weeks? Does the size of the system, say a 2-bedroom system versus an 8-bedroom system, is there any difference in that?
Well, there's no real good data to show that. However, the closer a system is sized to its actual loading, which gets there down at the 2 and 3 bedroom size, the closer it gets, the faster it will come up because the food is there. The food to water ratio is there. If you have a 6-bedroom house design, that thing's been sized for 660 gallons. That media size for that, everything that's biological has been sized for 660. Most likely, it's only going to see 200. Even on startup, it's going to see 200 to 300. Now, a 2-bedroom house, that's sized for 220 gallons or 330. It's going to probably see 200. So that's pretty close to its design value that it's going to see. Those will come up to work faster because the food is there. All of this is driven by biology, and all biology, as we know at our dinner table, is driven by food.
So can you make the design, is the design different for a 2-bedroom than it would be for an 8-bedroom?
Absolutely, the sizing is, and that's sort of an artifact of how we design systems.
Okay.
Think about this, most 6 and 8-bedroom residential homes, they're still going to use 200 to 300 gallons a day. They're sized for 660. Most 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom homes with 2 individuals in the house, they're probably going to do 120 to 200 gallons a day. That's pretty close to their design as opposed to the 600 only using 200 a day. So we generally oversize larger homes by code because it's required in the code. Unfortunate. It's an unfortunate artifact of a requirement because that 6-bedroom home could theoretically have the 12 people that it's probably maxed out at. And you know, here in the summer, I'm sure you don't have any of that overcrowding issue.
No, not at all.
So you don't have to worry about that here.
Questions from our experts here.
If we have the map, it would be nice. Do you have the map?
Well, I saw the map around the harbor in which areas you were proposing to have alternative septic
Right, it's a
systems.
big area.
Yes.
And, the zoning changes halfway out from acre to 3 acres, all
Right.
the way out to the end. 10,000 square feet per bedroom. Do you think it's necessary if somebody has a large lot, which these regulations would do, is require them to still put an alternative in if they didn't, with the 10,000 square feet per bedroom?
The answer to the question is how fast do you need to go in what time period?
Right.
And the answer to the question, and the right analogy is, how much nitrogen needs to be removed from that portion of the harbor? If your studies say, look, we need to get rid of 90% of this nitrogen in this area, 60% or 50%, then you simply need to say, what tool in my toolbox gets me there, and how will I get myself there by your regulation or implementation? So the answer to your question is, what if the study said, how much do you have to remove from that portion of the harbor? If the study says everybody needs to remove about 50% of that nitrogen from that watershed, doesn't matter how big the size of those lots are.
Yeah.
That's the number that drives the answer to your question.
And I think I don't know if Richard could remember, that was, we could reach that. Didn't they say that with the TMDL if we...
Remove 50%?
Right. Yeah.
Well, that was a goal. Jeff, do you remember? That sounds familiar, yeah.
So if that's so, then it makes sense
Right.
that every home in that watershed should remove 50% of the nitrogen somehow.
Right.
Somehow. Now, that could be everybody have their own individual system, which, of course, we've already talked about what that should also concurrently carry with it, a good tracking system so that you know the performances. Or you could have small cluster systems in some areas that remove up to 90% and let some other people skid. However, that speaks to an issue of equity. You know, here you're going to bang these 20 people, like really
Yeah.
make them remove it
It
all,
makes
and
it-
then these other people are going to say whatever.
That's complicated.
I'm sure you've had the discussions. They're not easy, and they're usually heated, and there's usually more heat than light.
Do we have, these systems need maintenance, do we have the ability on island to maintain more than 200?
Are you talking about the operating and maintenance?
Yeah, just the
Yeah,
yearly maintenance.
absolutely.
We have the company's capacity.
Yeah, this company's from
absolutely.
off
If you
island.
build it,
Island.
they will come.
The ability- they will come.
It's really, it's a matter of demand. If you have a number of systems out there that require the maintenance, and you require the maintenance, I'll tell you just the little story that when we first started doing this in our county, we realized that only about 20% of the people, even less, had maintenance contracts, and the performance suffered terribly. We would have data coming into us that just looked bad because some people were unplugging them, some just said, hey, I don't want them anymore, they just shut them off. But as we started making the letters available, sending the letters to people saying, look, the state says, and you agreed to a maintenance contract, as we started bringing them online, I can anticipate one of two things. Here's the sequence. You require that the maintenance contractors report to you their findings. They report to you and say, I don't have that client anymore. They threw me off the property. So then you have to follow up with the letter to the owner, and pretty soon the maintenance folks are really loving you because you're bringing in them the business. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. You are making sure that what you are requiring works in perpetuity. And that's not a thing that you should take lightly. You should make sure you're going to give a requirement for somebody to put in a septic tank or fast. You should make darn sure that that thing works to the expectation they told you when they were before you asking for it.
So there's an obvious additional requirement of more work for the health department.
Well, as I said, if you go through ours, but look, I'm not here selling ours.
You know, I mean, we're going to use your system. We've already passed, the issue is it
Once
does
that's-
require some of our work to keep it
Yes,
up.
once that's there, then you will receive monthly, weekly, daily, if you want. How many people out there of your, how many systems?
214.
214 systems are in compliance. You'll receive a nice little list. And if you really want that, you could just bump that into your form letters, that list with the addresses into form letters that go out to people and say, hey, you're here to appear before the Board of Health because you don't have a contract. But generally, we make a phone call to the owner first. And we say, Mrs. Smith, you have a system. It isn't being maintained because you've thrown the operator off your site. You don't want to pay them anymore. We understand that. However, your board requires this. So do we report to your Board of Health that you would like to disobey their order for that? Or do we report to them that you will be in compliance before 2 weeks? That's totally up to them. And it's totally up to you, the level of compliance. For most towns, what we do is we provide that list and say, how bad do they have to be before you want to hear from us? And you can set that. You can say, I only want to see them if 2 of their consecutive readings are out of place and they throw the operator off the site. And that's when you'll get a list from us of those people who meet that criteria.
Any other questions from the board or?
One question on, you know, a lot of these systems have different uses DEP gives them, whether it's piloting,
Yes.
general. And what I want to know is, I think what I'm hearing from you is maybe that's not as important as the data?
Well, the data speak, that's for sure. You have different levels of approval, provisional, general, whatever, and some people say, well, we only want to have general use systems. Well, that's going to trim you down to just a few vendors. But if you want to look at the data to see and decide for yourself, here are the subset of systems out there that may not have full general use approval for nitrogen removal, but remove nitrogen and they've got a proven track record, then the board, based on the data, could make a decision and say, anybody who keeps a median above this number, we're going to allow, and we're going to call those allowable technologies. And that's what a board could do. You could set that policy to say, you know, on those database, and then as you develop your own, as you can start to see your own data, you can say only those on the island that perform to this level we're going to allow. You know, so the question I think hidden there is, do we run any risk by requiring somebody to put in a system that doesn't have general use approval but might have provisional use approval? And I would say, no, you don't run that risk, because they are not being required to put them in under their provisional use approval. You're approving them because they have a track record of removing nitrogen. Now, as you may know, in the Commonwealth, a technology is only allowed 50 systems under provisional use approval. So if a system already has 50 in under that approval, you can't approve the next one under provisional, but you can approve them under their general use for non-nitrogen removal and require them to have nitrogen performance. It's a very subtle nuance there, but the quick answer to your question is systems like Septatech, systems like Singulair, those systems that have provisional approval, don't have general use approval, but you look at some of their numbers, they're doing pretty well. So based on the numbers, you can decide these are going to be the available technologies, best available technologies. In the Chesapeake, they call them BATs, best available technologies.
So until we get our data, we could theoretically use Barnstable County's data.
Yeah, you could look on the site and say, okay, call up every fast tuna on Cape Cod. Okay, that meets our criteria. Call up every Singulair. Oh, that does. Call up every, you name the technology, and go right down the line and say, okay, based on that, we're going to allow these technologies because these have been proven to work. Remember when you didn't allow Septatech out here? Remember why that was? You used our database to show that they weren't working. Thank you very much, by the way, because you know what that prompted? They went back and retrofitted every one of their failing systems, or the ones that were not removing nitrogen, I won't call them failing, in our area, and got them all up to snuff. So thank you very much, by the way.
You're welcome.
Because they now removed those systems that weren't supposedly designed for nitrogen removal are now removing nitrogen.
Anything else from the board? Maybe we could take a few questions from the public for the next, say, 10 minutes or so. Anyone has any?
No.
Yeah, go ahead. Please just stand up and identify.
Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors. I just want to get to the issue of the maintenance contracts. Just so you know, and it's been the board's policy for some time now, that when we do an as-built of a septic system for an IA system, that when we submit for certificate of compliance, they're requiring that the maintenance contract be with it, and that they won't issue a certificate of compliance until that maintenance contract is in place.
Right.
Most of the systems that we're doing at the Septatech, that's an island company. Their yearly contract now is about $750 a year for their yearly contract. But the board has not been issuing certificate of compliances without those maintenance contracts. So
Exactly.
it sounded like you maybe thought that none of this was being
No.
But
I know that was all happening. I just thought we were had our data into their system. So no, I understand that completely. Anything
and
else?
I don't know about the other one, but that Septatech, you know, again, it's an island kind of firm that they're here, but that's about, I think it's about $750
Right.
a year now is what they're doing.
But
Yeah, and the
what's-
question is, after that first contract expires, whether they...
That's
Renew it.
exact.
That's
And
right.
just so you know, generally, here's that sequence that happens. Owner says, I don't want the maintenance contract anymore because I don't like my provider. And so we say, okay, Mrs. Smith, you don't like that one, so who will you have? And Mrs. Smith generally will say, well, I don't want anybody. So, well, you got to have somebody. And push comes to shove, they usually go right back to that same provider because it wasn't an issue that they didn't like the service. They just didn't want to pay for any service.
Right.
So that's why most of the contractors in our area don't mind us pushing that button as many times as we have to, because 95% of the time they go right back to the same provider. They just didn't think they were going to get caught.
I would think that it would be up to the service provider that if his contract is terminated, that if he notified, well, I mean, that's the best way for the board to be notified,
Right.
would be that he notifies.
It's exactly how it's done.
It has to be done.
Usually, the contractor will say, because we require that contractor to let us know when it's lapsed.
Yeah.
And they give us a little email, and we return an email, usually to the owner.
Any other questions? Go ahead, just, if you could just identify yourself,
I
please.
just wanted a clarification. You said when a system is started up after winter is not being used, there are 2 to 3 weeks or a month
Yes,
to start working and then a 50% reduction of nitrogen.
yes.
So during that first month, is there 100% nitrogen going out?
No, but it's,
I didn't
but-
know what it meant not working.
that's right. You're not up to your optimal performance within that first 3 weeks as it's building up the biomass in there, the bugs. It's not removing up to your maximum. It's working its way there, but it's not there. So it isn't like 100% nitrogen, but let's assume for the sake of argument that no nitrogen is removed for the first 2 to 3 weeks. Even that gets balanced off by the fact that 75% has already been removed, plus it will start performing after that first month.
Tobias?
And also, it's not as if that nitrogen all of a sudden.
Could you just, I just want to hear you.
It's not as if that nitrogen is instantly leaving the system as soon as it goes into it. It might stick around in the system for a week or two.
Correct.
As the bacteria builds up.
As the bacteria builds up, it's actually using that nitrogen being fed to it to build its mass. So we call it luxury uptake. We just don't know how bad that number is, so I always say, okay, let's assume it's the worst. It's probably not the worst.
One more, go ahead.
If a house isn't rented for a month, will the system shut down?
No.
How long does it take for the system?
Well, depending on how much food that it does get when it restarts up, it will obviously tail off a little during that month because it's not getting any food. But it's like, particularly in the summer, it's warm, it's ready to go, and you start feeding it, it's kicking right back up. We actually did a nice little experiment where we took 2 of the major systems out there, I won't name them. One was a trickling filter and one was fixed activated sludge treatment. Let's see, that's fast. And we actually ran them every week. We would shut them down. In the winter now, in the winter, we shut them down from Monday and started them up on Friday and took the sample Monday morning to see how they would work seasonally on the shoulder season, because people would be coming down just for the weekend. The sad story is I actually came in on Sunday to set up the sample and didn't realize I could have done any 5-day stretch with nothing. So that shows you how dumb I am. But what we found was that even through the winter, that thing kept nitrifying and denitrifying, the trickling filter. The fixed activated sludge did, but not as well as a trickling filter. So what we surmised by that little experiment is that if you shut it off during the week, if you just came down weekends, that puppy would crank. Plus, you're getting the 100% removal during the week when you're not there.
Okay, one more question, or two more, and then we'll,
Mr. Chair,
yeah.
I really need everybody to announce their names.
Please announce your names. Yes.
My name is Caitlin Shaw. I'm from the Natural Resources Department. I have a couple of questions. One is with seasonal systems, there's sometimes caretakers will come and get the house ready for people to come and use it. I know that the best way to start up the system is by using it. Do you have any suggestions for seeding, something that maybe a caretaker could do when they come to the house to open it up?
Yeah, I don't know whether the owner would allow it, but
Well, I mean, not
Oh, I would-
but like something
I'm sorry.
seeding process.
yes. Well, there really is, I've not seen any good data to show the seeding part because what really you're trying to seed is the niter fires. Those are the things that are the slowest to start up. And I guess you could go to an aquarium store and get Nitrosomonas nitrobacter and dump it in. I've tried that. It doesn't seem to really speed the process up that much. So the only thing they could probably do to get it going is actually use the toilet. I mean, okay, can we talk? You could probably dump 20 pounds of dog food in there. That would do something. But really, do we really want to have people wasting dog food like that? I mean, it's carbon, it's a little nitrogen. So I would say that is not worth the benefit that you would achieve. And it would make a great story for the newspaper, but I don't think we want to go there.
Also, if Septitech is the system that it looks like we have a number of here, while we're getting the data to be online, is there a way to provide Septitech with the means to connect that, or it's really through?
Oh, they could.
Because it seems like from what you said, it's the company that.
If there is only one company, as you said, that really is the key, and they have a database that they can send to us, if they would be willing to do that, then we could certainly talk about dumping their data and ripping it into our system. So that would save your Board of Health some time. But I'm not sure. Is there only one?
Oh, no, I mean, Septitech has an island presence. They're here.
Oh, okay.
They service the systems, but the microbath is used quite a bit over here.
Yeah.
And so forth. The Septitech is a nice thing here because you make a call and somebody from the island is there to service it.
Well,
It's
what
not
might
just-
save you some time for your Board of Health, and your agent might consider this, is contact those two companies and say, look, this is what we're about to do. We've been trying to do it. Takes a lot of effort to get it done. Would you object to dumping the data to wherever you want, our system, and see whether they do it?
Just, we already have the database. They got 112 of the 214
Okay,
systems
and you have
out
all
here.
the owners' names and
Got,
information?
yes, we do, but I believe they did not have many operating and maintenance agreements.
Right. See, that's how it will
So
start,
I don't
folks.
believe he's got the data.
Yeah.
So we probably don't have enough data to make any conclusions, so just
So-
truck on.
We need to get the operating and maintenance agreements active and in this tracking system, and once all that work's done, it'll be easy from there. It's not going,
Okay.
it's just the initial work getting it
Right.
in.
All right, over here, and then one more, and then we'll sum up. And then Tobias.
My question is, do you have any advice for the board, and perhaps what have you and your board done in order to improve compliance? As you had said, you were down at 20% level.
Right.
We're probably somewhere, I'm guessing, from this, maybe around there as well. As Paul said, we submit the as-bills. First year is good. I've designed many of these systems. The out years, just like you said, people, it costs money. If there's no enforcement, there's no compliance. So what have you done, how could the board go about when folks just say no? And I understand you start off trying to nicely bring it in.
Right.
But if they continue down that, do you actually...
Okay, down that path, the Board of Health issues an order. And you'd probably have a standard form on your computer that would issue an order to obtain within so many days a service contract per the permit for the system itself. And then, apprise them of their right to a hearing within 7 days, blah, 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 the fines, whatever. Most people can't afford the $250 a day. Some probably could. Be good for the revenues, I suppose. But that's how we do it. We have a standard letter which goes out and says, you are to appear before the Board of Health on this day to show cause why you have not obtained a permit and why the board should not. And then go further. That's it. So
Okay.
the board really has to have that locked in on a, yep, here it is, boom, you're not going to do it, fine, here's your order. Then, of course, when they don't do it, that's failure to obey an order of the Board of Health, which comes with a fine, and then it's off to court.
Okay.
We've never had to really chase it that far.
Okay, Tobias,
Two questions, if you don't mind.
go right ahead.
The first one is, what percentage of the 1,800 systems you have in Barnstable are hooked up to municipal water?
I would say probably, just a guess, 50% of them.
So
50 to 60%.
So, just out of curiosity, have you cross-referenced water meters with your data?
Yes. In fact, that's how we figured out that some of the good working systems are posers, and some of the poor working systems are just really frugal with their water. Because if you have people using only, on an average, 20 gallons a day, and they're kicking out, well, let's use the example, 20 gallons a day, and they're kicking out 38 milligrams per liter. They're doing a phenomenal job at removing nitrogen because their influent numbers are really high. Now, you can't really not know what the influent number is. Most technologies recycle back to the head of the tank, so you can't get a real good influent number. But the ones we have looked at like that with sparing water use are up into the 70 to 90 milligrams per liter coming in. So if they're doing 19 out, God bless them.
So under that scenario, if you have 79 coming in, you got 19 coming out, you got a 75% reduction.
Yes.
But that is the percentage
That's-
of the amount of nitrogen going into the system.
That's correct.
So,
you have to actually do a load reduction.
right, percentage-wise, but what we want to do is what you said, a load reduction to the actual, we're not trying to deal with the percentage, we're trying to actually reduce the actual amount. We're not trying to, the goal is to reduce the amount of nitrogen, not the percentage of nitrogen parts per million.
Absolutely, but that percentage should lead you to what the load reduction is. The percentage reduction, as long as you know the volume of water they're using. So what we have recommended, that when people put these systems in, as part of the maintenance, they check the water usage. Because I will tell you that we have some folks, for instance, in Dennis, they come really high with their nitrogen, and the Board of Health is just ready to drop that hammer down on them. And we start looking at their water use and say, no, the load reduction here is greater than 50%. And that's what you're looking at, the load reduction. So I would recommend with any of your operation maintenance, have the guy just take the water reading, either that or go to the water department and download those data, because that's how we do it. We actually download the large data set.
Just the last question is, on the island, I think we have a bit of an interest in tight tanks, I mean personally, in the sense that you're actually dealing with 100% of the affluent and processing the facility. I'm wondering what your thoughts are going forward, petitioning the state through a whole new petition.
Well, it depends on how many you're doing. I mean, it's all economics at some point. But if you've got to manage a whole lot of tight tanks, I will say, particularly if the homeowner has to pay for pumping that tight tank out, there is an incentive, and I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, of diverting some of the wastewater that they otherwise would have to pay to haul away to some other location in a clandestine manner. That's the nicest I can put it. Because we've seen tight tanks in other jurisdictions, and all of a sudden a homeowner goes out and buys a 30 horsepower Meyer pump, and you can move a lot of water with a 30 horsepower Meyer pump.
Well, I mean, I think, I'll comment on, Richard, and then I'll comment on tight tanks.
Oh, I've got to look at him. I came over to speak about animal rights. They wouldn't let me.
Blackwater, graywater systems.
Yes. Okay, blackwater, graywater situations. There is probably, for instance, composting toilets, that kind of separation, or separate the black water into a tight tank and then graywater. Graywater will contain about 10% of your nitrogen, 10 to 20%. We found that of all the graywater systems we've monitored that go into composting toilets, we monitor graywater, so it's very analogous to if it was diverted to a tight tank. We've found that the concentration of nitrogen is generally about 10 milligrams per liter. So we liken that to about a 90% load reduction because, of course, at 10 milligrams per liter there's a lot more gray water proportionally than there is water part of it than black water. So is there a strategy where black water could be diverted to a tank and then pumped up? Yeah, of course there is. I mean, anything's possible. You'd have the gray water disposed on site. Don't be thinking that you're going to get rid of all the nitrogen, because there's still nitrogen in that gray water, and from food particles, people peeing in the shower, and if you say you never did, you lie about other things too. And there's a certain amount of nitrogen that's going to get in that gray water. So black water, can you do that? I'll tell you that we've looked at it in Falmouth around a harbor where we know that there are certain houses that are only occupied for a month out of the year, 2 months out of the year. And we're moving forward with it in sort of a piloting thing. But a mass application where the town would have to track that, I have to go back to the fact that when you have a tank and somebody has to pay for moving that water, there's an incentive to move it themselves. And who knows where it goes after that. So, depending on your regulatory framework and how you are confident that it can't happen, maybe you lock those puppies up with huge locks and say you can't move it without a town pumper truck coming and get it. Maybe that's a possibility.
Well, that's an interesting option. Is in these areas to have tight tanks, which would be less expensive for the homeowners, and then the town take on the job of removing the waste.
Yeah. Well, there's some analysis needs to be done
Yeah.
on the footprint that you're going to have hauling this stuff. Two, the impact on your wastewater treatment plant as you bring in a fairly
Right.
concentrated load, and seeing whether you can still...
That's a solution that would be less costly for the homeowners.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, the town has to pick up some of that cost, but we would also know that we wouldn't have to deal with maintenance contracts. If we were responsible for getting rid of it, we would know it's done.
Well,
Interesting idea. We'll talk
correct.
about it. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we'll move on. My question is, what question haven't you been asked? What question haven't I asked that I should have?
That's a good one, because I've been fielding them from all different fields here. I think you pretty much got it. And I think the biggest thing a board has to decide is, you've got a nitrogen loading issue. How do you want to deal with it? And if you decide, through public process, through your joint deliberations with conservation, whoever you do, meet with, if you decide alternative septic systems are a viable option, then I strongly urge you to start doing it right to make sure that these things are tracked. Because otherwise, that's a huge waste of infrastructure that you're putting out there. So decide on reasonable monitoring requirements to make sure you're really achieving your goals. Decide on what actions you'll take when somebody tells you to pound sand, they don't want the contract anymore. Make all of those decisions so that they're now in the hands of your agent. They're just, there's the cookbook, here's what I do, boom, go right through it, and make it easy enough to manage for your Board of Health, because they're the ones, your health agents are going to be the ones bearing the brunt of any tracking. If it's septic pumping, if it's IA systems, you name it, they're going to be the ones to bear the brunt of it.
Well, thank you. That was very helpful. It really helped me, because I had a lot of questions, and I feel I'm better informed now.
Well,
We
please
can move forward.
check on to that
Yep.
website for that. There's the MassTech website, which gives you information on new and emerging technologies. You could be thinking about, where are we going to be going with the black water, gray water separation? Because the biggest issue there is going to be, what will that do to the real estate value for that home that has a tight tank? I mean, that's the question you're going to have from the homeowners.
Yeah.
That's what we got with composting toilets. It was like, as soon as they realized that that wasn't really, that wasn't quite ready for prime time, and people didn't accept it, they realized that would impact the home cost. They dropped that like a hot potato. So I would put some trial balloons out there and start talking to people about whether, and real estate folks, there's some folks talk about, what will that do if we have a tight tank in the yard?
Thank you. Any more questions from the board or Art?
Yes, George, the the pilot program that you're working on in Falmouth with
Yes.
Blackwater, Greywater, how many homes are involved in that?
Well, that's a very good question. We opened it up and gave them all the incentives, $5,000 right in their hand to do whatever they wanted to do. Our county developed a zero-interest loan for all of their repairs for a 20-year betterment, and we've only got a handful, well, two handfuls of people right now that do it. And the data indicate it's fairly stable on those, indicate about a 90% load reduction, but most people, you couldn't give these things away. We had quite an incentive program for them. And most of the complaint was, what will it do to my real estate value? And when they talked to a real estate person, they said, no, thank you.
What was your target?
Our target was 50.
Okay. And DEP was fine with that?
Oh, for composting toilets?
Oh, it was composting, not, this wasn't a Blackwater tight tank?
Well, correct. Blackwater tight tank. We have one, the way we've done tight tanks, we just, in fact, on the board, we just approved one last week. A Blackwater separation tight tank, but only in the instance where the person already had a totally compliant Title V system. That's what we did. That's the easiest way to do it, because why? Just throw the valve if they don't want it to work. Now, if you're going to do the other piece, I'll tell you right now, because we're going through it in West Falmouth Harbor, we're talking to homeowners about this very thing. How about a Blackwater tank? Would you be willing to do this? You know their prime objection is? Wouldn't believe this one. They said, would we have to register it with the deed? That's the deal breaker. Would we have to register it with the deed? You know what the answer is, of course? Yes, you would have to register it with the deed, because anybody buying a house needs to know what they're buying. And that's backing a lot of people away from it.
Okay, one more question, because we have to run. Real quick.
Absence of the IA systems, any benefit because of the sandy soils through just dose?
Pressure dosing system. If you read the literature, there's nitrogen reduction there. I haven't seen it personally where we have been, unless that system is up close in the upper soil layers. So you got a pressure, a drip system.
Yeah.
Seems to remove a little bit more nitrogen, and that's pressure. It's high pressure, but it's pressure. But we have not seen it. Pathogen reduction, absolutely.
Okay, listen, I'm going to turn the meeting over to my co-chair, and you can, I really have to go.
Okay.
So you go on as long as you all feel comfortable. If there's still questions,
I got a 10 o'clock vote, so you guys
I don't want to stop this discussion. So you can go on as long as you want, and as long as actually I can't leave because we don't have a quorum. So let us close the meeting, and then you can discuss as friends. So if there's no objection to adjourning the meeting from the board, then the meeting is adjourned by unanimous consent. And thank you for coming personally. And why don't you all just stay and keep it going?
Talk about poop. Let's go. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, just go right ahead.
George, you talked about the separation distance groundwater with Title V regulations 4 and Title 6, and talk about the benefit of that.
Well, anytime you separate 1 foot, the premium you get for like a horizontal separation is high, because the Beto zone is